Good evening, friends. Belgrade. The pre-New Year atmosphere here was supposed to feel cozy. Streets lined with garlands, children waiting for presents, families preparing festive tables. But tonight, the city is plunged into darkness. The sirens echo across silent neighborhoods. People huddle near their windows, listening for the sound of explosions, praying that this time it won't be their building. When the impact finally comes, the lights go out completely. The cold quickly follows. No power, no heating. The holiday spirit is replaced by fear and fatigue. And hundreds of kilometers away, St. Petersburg. Once known for its elegance and nightlife, the city now feels hollowed out. Empty storefronts stretch along Nevsky Prospect, one after another, closed, for rent, under renovation, for sale. Familiar shops have vanished, the cafes are gone, clothing boutiques shuttered. Even the bright lights of the shopping streets have dimmed. What was once Russia's window to Europe looks now like a museum of closed doors. December 2025. This is the new reality. In Moscow, the stories are smaller, but no less revealing. In an ordinary supermarket, a seller tries to throw away expired goods and is stopped by people pulling the food from her cart before it reaches the trash. Better than nothing, one says quietly. The camera catches it all. There is bitterness, but also resignation. The line between survival and dignity blurs. It has been more than 3 years since the start of the war. The results are painful to summarize. There are fewer men on the streets. Construction sites and delivery companies are now filled with migrant workers from South Asia and Africa. Where are the locals? Someone asks on camera. De-Slavicized and de-Russified, another replies with dark irony. The metaphor of a snail crawling from Donetsk to Vienna in these years spreads through social media. 1,600 kilometers in total, while the army has moved forward by 45. A snail moves faster than the war, yet it still demands concessions. In the city of Yelets, volunteers ask citizens to bring fabric, cotton, flannel, any material they can find, to sew warm underwear for soldiers. The request is simple but revealing. Winter has arrived, and the army still lacks the basics. Meanwhile, in Togliatti, the wife of a local deputy smiles in an interview. She proudly shares how she traveled to Chile to give birth so that her baby would have a strong passport and freedom to travel. She lists the benefits of life abroad: low crime, stable economy, beautiful language, all while her husband continues his career at home, drawing income from the same system his family chooses to avoid. As the war drags on, the distance between ordinary Russians and their leaders widens. For some, patriotism is a slogan. For others, it is a burden carried quietly every day. Across the border, the Security Service of Ukraine announces that a Russian submarine launching missiles toward Ukrainian cities has been destroyed, right at its base in Novorossiysk. No details are confirmed, but the news circulates widely, stirring both pride and disbelief. And in Grozny, the leader of Chechnya makes a new statement. He urges parents not to fear sending their sons to war, to rejoice that they serve their country. The words spark controversy. Someone from the crowd shouts a question: why hasn't his own son gone? The microphone cuts off before an answer comes. Even protests are beginning to return, this time in Krasnodar. Around 1,000 people gather to oppose the construction of a church meant to honor soldiers. They hold signs calling for green zones, parks, places of peace instead of monuments to war. Their voices tremble, but they don't fall silent. All of this paints a picture that is both familiar and deeply unsettling. Cities growing darker, people growing poorer, words growing emptier. And still, official speeches speak of growth, stability, revival. Yet when analysts from a major bank take a closer look, they find that 2/3 of that economic growth comes from producing tanks and bombs. The circle closes. The economy feeds the war, and the war justifies the economy. Stay with us, because what you've just heard is only the surface. In the next part, we'll go deeper into the hidden core of this story, the politics, the profits, and the personal choices shaping Russia's fourth year of war. Don't forget to subscribe. What comes next is something you'll want to hear. Part 2. When we peel away the layers of slogans, the heart of this story beats with quiet contradictions. In every Russian city, there is a visible duality between the posters promising victory and the daily scenes that speak of fatigue. The same government channels that celebrate economic success show footage of factories running day and night, but those factories produce not tools for life, but instruments of war. Analysts at Raiffeisenbank revealed what few dared to say aloud. 2/3 of Russia's economic growth now depends on the defense industry. Tanks, shells, drones, missiles, these have become the currency of progress. When numbers are added up in official reports, they look impressive. But behind those digits lie workers who never see daylight, regions where consumer goods have disappeared, and towns whose budgets depend entirely on contracts to build destruction. It's not just about economics. It's about an entire worldview that has shifted from the idea of building for the future to surviving the present. In the once industrial heartlands of the Urals, residents describe how factories that once produced machinery for railways now assemble armored vehicles. In Tagil and Chelyabinsk, wages have risen, but only for those linked to the war effort. Everyone else feels the quiet erosion of hope. The gap between the state's triumphalist rhetoric and the people's reality grows wider with each passing month. Meanwhile, Moscow continues to function as a separate planet. Its streets are still lit, restaurants still open, boutiques still selling imported goods, often through parallel import schemes. But even here, something feels off. Conversations have become cautious. People lower their voices in cafes when speaking about the front or about those who left. It's not fear in the old Soviet sense, but a new kind of numbness, a quiet understanding that the line between truth and survival has blurred. In contrast, across Russia's borders, the narrative looks different. Kiev, despite constant air raids, continues to live, rebuild, and hope. The attack on the submarine in Novorossiysk, confirmed by multiple intelligence sources, marked one of Ukraine's boldest operations of the year. It showed that even the most secure bases were no longer untouchable. The symbolism struck deeply. The sea that once carried Russia's pride now carries its vulnerability. In response, state media in Moscow avoided the topic entirely. Instead, they showed footage of new infrastructure projects, bridges, schools, cultural centers, though many of those sites remain half-built or merely drawn on paper. As this cycle of denial deepens, even loyal voices begin to tremble. The patriotic blogger Ivan Orakovsky, once one of the loudest defenders of the war, suddenly turns critical. In a long video, he speaks with disillusioned clarity. "We've become a raw material base for China," he says. "They build, we extract. We sell them energy, they sell us technology. We are not gaining sovereignty, we're trading it." The clip spreads across Telegram channels, quietly deleted from some, reposted by others. It becomes a moment of accidental honesty. Even those who believed in the early slogans start asking uncomfortable questions. Outside the online space, signs of exhaustion are visible everywhere. Recruitment posters grow larger, more colorful, more desperate. New slogans appear in schools. "The future belongs to the brave." Yet students whisper other things. They count how many classmates have older brothers who never returned. In small towns, the military cemeteries expand faster than playgrounds. Mothers attend silent vigils, though they rarely call them that. They bring candles and photographs, place them quietly, and leave before cameras arrive. At the same time, the story of the Tolyatti deputy's wife continues to circulate, not as gossip, but as a symbol. She, like many members of the privileged elite, speaks of patriotism while investing in safety abroad. "Chile," she says, offers her child opportunity and security. Her husband's speeches in the Duma, full of loyalty and devotion to the homeland, are broadcast the same week. The contrast is impossible to miss. It's a portrait of a generation of leaders who speak of sacrifice but rarely experience it. In Grozny, Ramzan Kadyrov's words about rejoicing when sons go to war echo through the North Caucasus. The statement divides even his supporters. Some interpret it as religious duty, others see it as cruel indifference. When asked why his own son remains home, the question is ignored, but the silence speaks volumes. The narrative of shared destiny fractures when faced with personal exceptions. In Krasnodar, the protest against the new church dedicated to soldiers becomes one of the largest local demonstrations of the year. Residents argue that faith should unite, not divide, and that the few remaining parks should not be sacrificed for symbols of militarization. The movement starts small, local activists, families, elderly citizens, but grows as videos spread. The government responds cautiously, unwilling to create martyrs, but equally unwilling to tolerate open defiance. The standoff becomes a quiet test of how much dissent the state still allows. Through all of this, the psychological atmosphere in the country becomes heavy, almost tangible. In the media, the word victory is repeated endlessly, but fewer people can define what it actually means. On the front, progress is measured in meters, not miles. Inside the country, progress is measured in how well people adapt, how quickly they learn to accept the unacceptable. The illusion of normal life continues. Concerts, sports, holidays, parades. Yet, even in these moments, something feels hollow, as though everyone knows they're performing a version of reality that no longer exists. And then there's the external dimension. The Kremlin continues to speak of multipolarity, of resisting the West, of new alliances. But the practical reality shows something else: growing economic dependence on China, Turkey, and a handful of Asian intermediaries. Deals that were once presented as partnerships now look like lifelines. China buys oil at discounts. India negotiates prices on its terms. Meanwhile, domestic inflation rises, and imported goods become luxuries. Still, the propaganda machine continues its work, insisting that everything is under control. Yet behind closed doors, business elites quietly move assets abroad, secure foreign residencies, and send their children to study in Europe or Latin America. The contradiction between public loyalty and private escape becomes impossible to hide. As these layers of tension accumulate, one question begins to form in the minds of many Russians. How long can this balance of denial last? How long can a society function on parallel realities, one for the screen, another for the street? The story is far from over. In the final part, we will explore what might come next, the potential turning points, the silent resistance, and the uncertain path that lies ahead. Stay tuned and subscribe, because the next part may change how you see everything that's happening now. Part 3. As the fourth winter of the conflict unfolds, the emotional map of Russia begins to shift in subtle but powerful ways. There is no single explosion of protest or dramatic collapse, only the slow erosion of belief. In places like Belgorod, Voronezh, and Kursk, the proximity of war has become an everyday condition. The sound of air raid sirens no longer startles. It simply signals another night without sleep. People have learned to charge their phones before evening, to keep candles ready, to check telegram channels before turning off the lights. The border regions live in a constant state of tension, yet also in a strange numbness, the kind that comes from realizing that danger has become routine. Meanwhile, in the grand cities far from the front, a different mood prevails. In St. Petersburg, cultural life continues, but audiences have changed. Concert halls still fill up, yet the applause feels restrained. Artists speak in metaphors, journalists choose their words with surgical precision. The most daring form of dissent today is not a protest, but a pause, a refusal to repeat the official script. In literature, theatre, and even stand-up comedy, coded language has become the new form of honesty. The public listens carefully, searching for meaning between the lines. In Moscow, symbols of power remain intact. Skyscrapers glitter, parades march, foreign delegations arrive. But beneath that surface, even insiders admit that something essential has been lost. The country that once saw itself as a great civilization now defines greatness by endurance. In private conversations among bureaucrats, phrases like, "we must hold on," replace talk of victory. The unspoken understanding is that holding on, politically, economically, emotionally, has become the only realistic goal. The military industry, though hailed as the engine of growth, now consumes every available resource. Civilian sectors shrink, social spending declines, regional budgets struggle. Entire towns revolve around defense contracts, living off the war even as they fear its end. Teachers double as recruiters, factory managers as propagandists. The state offers medals, bonuses, and promises, while ordinary life quietly disappears beneath layers of mobilization. The propaganda speaks of unity, but reality divides the nation into two categories: those who fight and those who survive. Outside Russia, the world watches with a mixture of fatigue and apprehension. In Europe, leaders debate how long their support for Ukraine can continue without fracturing domestic politics. In Washington, discussions turn toward sustainable containment, a phrase that sounds strategic but means indefinite uncertainty. In Beijing, officials continue to smile diplomatically while securing favorable deals for energy and resources. For them, Russia's isolation is not a tragedy, but an opportunity. The Great Eurasian Partnership, presented in speeches as brotherhood, in practice functions as dependency. Moscow delivers oil, gas, and metals. Beijing sends electronics, vehicles, and the illusion of partnership. Within Russia, people adapt in unexpected ways. The black market thrives again, as it once did in the late Soviet years. Currency exchanges operate in whispers. Foreign goods arrive through obscure intermediaries. Telegram becomes the country's real public square, its chaotic feed replacing newspapers and television. Here, rumors, leaks, and fragments of truth collide. One channel reports new mobilization plans, another denies them. A third posts a video of soldiers speaking candidly from the front. The audience scrolls endlessly, suspended between hope and exhaustion. Among the younger generation, cynicism replaces fear. Teenagers who were 12 when the war began are now 16, entering adulthood with no memory of peace. Their world is one of shortages, propaganda, and digital censorship. Yet they are fluent in irony, a quiet rebellion disguised as humor. They mock official speeches through memes, share banned music through encrypted apps, and form online communities that exist beyond the reach of state control. It's not an organized resistance, but a cultural drift, the slow awakening of a generation that no longer believes in the myths of the past. In the regions, small acts of quiet defiance multiply. In Yekaterinburg, volunteers repaint walls covered with military slogans, replacing them with messages of hope or simple silence. In Novosibirsk, a local journalist publishes a story about missing soldiers under a pseudonym, knowing the risk. In Kaliningrad, a priest refuses to bless weapons, saying that a true blessing preserves life. Each act seems minor, but together they form a pattern, the emergence of conscience in a time that discourages it. At the same time, cracks appear within the elite. Some oligarchs, once loyal, begin to move assets abroad more aggressively. Others distance themselves quietly from state projects. Behind closed doors, debates grow sharper. How to end a war that no one can win without admitting defeat. Diplomats speak in cautious tones about frozen conflict, humanitarian corridors, mutual guarantees. The language becomes technical, bureaucratic, a way to avoid saying what everyone already knows, that the country has reached an impasse. And yet, despite this stagnation, the propaganda continues to insist that everything is going according to plan. It praises each small advance at the front, each new weapon produced, each international handshake. But the audience, though still watching, listens differently now. People have learned to decode the tone, the pauses, the facial expressions. They sense fatigue even in the announcers' voices. The more the government speaks of confidence, the more people feel uncertainty. Still, amid all this darkness, a quiet sense of clarity begins to spread. It comes not from political speeches or media reports, but from lived experience. People understand now what stability built on silence costs. They see how prosperity measured in bombs and tanks leads nowhere. They realize that patriotism cannot replace dignity, and that loyalty without truth becomes hollow. This understanding doesn't yet translate into revolution or protest, but it grows in conversations at kitchen tables, in train compartments, in the lines of poems, in the silence between words. And so the story comes to its uncertain conclusion, not with an explosion, but with awareness. The winter of 2025 closes over a nation that is still powerful, still proud, yet profoundly tired. Its leaders speak of destiny, its citizens think of survival.